All right. Welcome, everybody coming in there.
It's two people that I know. Hi.
Yay. Yeah, that's how these usually go, you know. All of our fans, you know, they come to support. I love it. Our friends and family and stuff. Okay, we'll probably give it like a couple minutes if there's anybody else who's going to come in to, you know, so that Emery can let folks into the room, and then we'll get started in just a few minutes. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just continue letting people in as they come. And my name is Taria Smith. I'm from Torres Martinez Reservation in Southern California, and I am the director of the Heyday Berkeley Roundhouse, which is the California Indian Publishing Program. And I'm also the editor of News from Native California magazine. Thank you all for joining us for the Heyday and News from Native California Sheltering Inspiration Program. And we have Sarah Biscarra Dilley with us today. And a special thank you to Native Cultures Fund with Humboldt Area Foundation for making this program possible this time around. We are recording, so if you do not want to appear on camera, please disable your camera, which I see most people have. And for now, welcome everybody from across the state, and I'll turn everything over to Sarah.
Hachu, I feel like I can be a little bit informal at the moment because it looks like the only two people in here are Sabina and Diego. So I guess I could start with Shu Hali Hali. Doesn't have to be the formal Hachu. I'm going to go ahead and just give a formal introduction and then just kind of launch into talking. I feel like this can be space for conversation since it is a small group of folks. So I may turn off my camera at different points in time if the internet gets a little laggy with the presentation, but I'll go right ahead. I'll start by saying, "Oh, yak tichu sa itana chochenyo mikotolo ni yapis puspu sa ichu. Shu hali hali mita Sarah Biscarra Dilley. Mamitana ekitanas mutul hinkatichu. Kisu tichu katakafla ni sithala. Wasamimu. Wasitakawayu. Casas Grandes. Wa Mokopuni o Hawaii. Wasitakawa. Sikyam mi punits putichu sa itana chochenyo mi huichin. Mitakana mi sakina wa mi kinahwana nitspu tilhinkatichu. Strategic planning team. while University of California, Davis Native American Studies. So when I'm introducing myself, I'm letting you know what my name is, that I come from good people from villages throughout the central coast of California, located predominantly throughout San Luis Obispo and Monterey counties. I also have relatives from Sweden, from Michoacan, from Chihuahua, from Baja California, and from Hawaii. I'm letting you know that my house is at Huichin, also known as Oakland, California, in the land of the Chochenyo-speaking people. And I'm letting you know that my knowledge comes from my family, from my homeland, from my language, from people that I collaborate with within my own community and beyond it, as well as the education that I introducing myself in that way is very central to the ways that I'm kind of looking at knowledge, how that relates to my visual arts practice, as well as my writing and other kind of creative or collaborative practices. This is something that I see in a lot of communities, that it's important to situate ourselves in relationship to our homelands, to one another, and to the knowledges that we are bringing to the table. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about just kind of how my practice has shifted throughout the pandemic. I think this has been like a reality for a lot of people. And while things are kind of starting to open up in some ways, I personally still feel very like tentative about moving forward in the ways that are being like laid out by the state. I think for a lot of Native people, what's been going on for the last year and a half has really activated some very old stories for us. So with that kind of space for reflection, I think that there's just been a lot of opportunities for introspection, and also kind of reevaluating what priorities might be. So, one of the things I've been thinking about is, during this time, as like somebody who's been in a PhD program, I hadn't had much time for a studio practice until pretty recently. So the first couple of months of the pandemic were really intensely about kind of adjusting to the changing sphere of things. But by the time summer got around, I started to actually have a little bit more headspace for creative work in a way that I hadn't experienced in some years, because I'd been so focused on just making it through a PhD program. I did not go to grad school before I started a PhD program. I applied directly out of undergrad, and there was a lot of things that I had to learn on the fly that I didn't, that took a lot of my energy, and to just figure out how to kind of take on the volume of work that I was doing in grad school. So having a little bit of space after passing qualifying exams, and then also the kind of added impact of shelter in place for most of the year, kind of opened up some space for a studio practice, but also to kind of set my schedule more around rest and place-based timelines. So this is why I have some of this acorn here, is that not having to drive to and from Davis to teach, having different kinds of responsibilities, or responsibilities that were able to be mobile, and because things had moved to like being online, made it more possible for me to center the things that I know I need to be doing culturally and like within my community. So that includes practicing our foodways, that making sure that I take the 4-hour trip home to be in those places at the right times of year. And it really helped kind of resituate my priorities in that way. But it's been a heavy year, right? There's been a lot that's happened. There's been a lot that has interrupted. There's been a lot of loss. And yeah, taking this time to kind of think about, yeah, like how I want things to look like moving forward as things do open up. Like what do I want to be at the center? What things are critical to my studio practice, and what things are critical to me feeling like whole and well. Yeah, so I was going to share a couple excerpts of some writing that I've done in the past couple of years. A lot of the last piece was released right before the pandemic began, in a magazine in Australia, an arts magazine called ArtLink. And then I'll share an excerpt of a chapter that is going to be published in a forthcoming anthology. It's me in my studio. I've spent a lot of time in my house in this back room in the last year. So the chapter that I'll be sharing part of today is going to be released in this forthcoming anthology that's being published by the University of Minnesota Press. It's going to be released in 2022, called Allotment Stories, Indigenous Land Relations Under Settler Siege. So this is a really exciting anthology. There is representation from people in California, from all over the Americas, from throughout Wananui Okiwa, like throughout the Pacific. There's representation of Sami communities, there's representation of Palestinian communities, but really looking at the ways that kind of privatization and the enclosure of the land interrupted Indigenous lifeways, but also the strategies that Native peoples have taken to kind of resist that enclosure. It's a mix of creative texts, things written by historians, things that are maybe more straightforward academic texts, but the chapter selection I'll be sharing is from this publication. So I'll go ahead and start reading some of that and then transition to the shorter piece that I wanted to share that has some video work accompanying it. Tia patakatla watia patia ana. Where are you from and where are you going? Patterns, parcels, place. Needs butil hinkatichu. Strange weaving of cattle, iron, oil, fat, or fur. Imagined a world in pieces. Calquilismo, fat, ranches, missions, candles, cattle. Where we dipped candles for forced prayer, they gave us new names. Often referred to as Obispeño Chumash, we are baptized with words again and again. An attempted transfiguration of the complex and layered relationships that make up Yaktichu Tichu, the people, into the perimeter of a mission, an assistencia, or a ranch. Mission documents, used as legible forms of verification for recognition, but also as the source of an unstable identity, decide our presence or absence in the eyes of the settler state without accounting for the complexity of our experiences, or the inherent contradiction of requiring existence to be verified by the same mechanisms that dispersed, dismembered, displaced us. Written into words and maps that remain fixed despite the life in all things, the systemic disordering of our worlds has been suspended across generations, attempting to make such violence a new creation story. But our self-determined identities have the exponential capacity to exist beyond the codified, grounded within our realities as Indigenous peoples and speaking from our respective centers of the world. While settlers imagine their possession, Indigenous peoples simultaneously deepen our connections, navigating narrative and physical confinement by maintaining long-standing relationships and challenging generational tensions to maintain survival. This includes relationships with other than human beings, places, and waterways, each of which contributes to a living sense of placemaking, of movement, and of alignment. Though plat maps display the world in flat quantified dimension, it is our stories and relations that awaken the images and text and imagine the disparate, a world in pieces. Our world is one of expansive whole, citing rivers and places with perspective and a language of family, of cultural protocol, of inspired determination. Elizabeth, Louise, Marie, Martha, Unacia, Lizzie, Mary, Maria Luisa, Leora, Lorenza, Jacinta, Crespina. Our cascade of names has always held multiple meanings, marking relation and continuum in place, a recipe, a middle name, the margin of a certificate of birth, an argument between parents. Like our continuance, our titled land came to be through relationship, only possible through my grandmother Louisa. Only possible through my grandmother Luisa, the Kanaka Oiwi daughter of Joaquin, son of an unbaptized Indio from Veracruz, born at Mission San Diego and coming of age at San Carlos Borromeo near Monterey. Like many other displaced, dispossessed, or diasporic peoples bound up in the mission system and its subsequent enclosure of the land, Joaquin became a renowned horseman, working in the 1830s and early 1840s for Kauikeuli, or Kamehameha III, herding feral longhorns into makeshift corrals along the slopes of holy mountains and valleys of Hawaii or the coastlines of West Maui. Her father, as imbricated in colonial industry as he was, represents the bridging of indigenous vaquero practices and then emergent Paniolo traditions, a quickening movement between California and Hawaii, a symbol of both innovation and fracture. This moment of imperial expansion is ongoing and iterative, manifesting as shifting colonial occupations in California, land grants and land loss traced on yellowing paper, while continuing to be echoed in United States military violence across the Pasini, the One Ocean, deepening further dispossession needs Puchilhincachichu through the use of eminent domain to build military bases, extract oil, flood valleys, or enact arms training. It reflects connections between peoples of saltwater and archipelagos existing long before colonial imposition, but also the dire choices indigenous peoples have had to make to ensure survival, including those that further distance us from who we are. Not only our responsibilities to our own land, waters, protocols, and lifeways, as well as, but also the respect for people, those of other indigenous peoples. What do you call a moment that never stopped? An endless stretch of changing realities. Place is in each of us. Each scene is unending, a point of occurrence implied, but unsuccessful. El Camino Real, the royal word, an imminent domain. Spool, earth, land, mountain, world, unratified treaties, homelands, and privatization. In California, the transition between nations driving occupation disrupted many adapted lifeways and patterns of survival. 18 treaties were negotiated with assumed representatives from less than half of California's tribes after the inception of statehood in 1850, most of which promised large tracts of land, 8.5 million acres in total, in exchange for ceding land bases that ran from the edge of the Great Basin to the sea. These negotiations were made in tandem with congressional policy that transferred newly acquired land in California to the public domain, another transfiguration through paper. While some people moved to these tracts of land allegedly set aside for them permanently, many others, like my own family, knew nothing of the treaties at all or chose to not leave the lands to which they had responsibility. Although terms were agreed upon, the treaties were never ratified. Supported by legislation passed before California was even formally a state, like an act for the government and protection of Indians, which stated, in no case could a white man be convicted of any offense upon the testimony of an Indian or Indians, and named white settlers' ability to, quote, obtain Indian children for indenture. This law also outlawed our land management practices, like the use of cultural burning, and made being present in our homelands an act of vagrancy, formalizing dominant narratives of perceived deviance. Due to a congressional gag order, the unratified treaties remained unknown to the public until 1905. These laws and the silences that accompany them shape the current moment. Relegating them to the realm of the historical ignores the linear pattern of policy in the United States. The profound absence of these histories when discussing recognition, as well as the restructuring of nation and state, trace through ongoing processes of displacement or gentrification, extraction and confinement, reflects the disturbing amnesia of a settler state. Considering legislation of erasure, foundational material, and narrative histories of the United States and the state of California as governing entities, our current moment and potential futurities must account for and remain in dialogue with these ongoing realities. My grandmother Luisa was born in 1837 to Ke'alala'o and Joaquin, daughter of a brief but tumultuous marriage. Documentation of her mother's life is largely absented, present only in the marriage record, divorce papers, secondhand mention, speculation, or avoidance entirely. These paths are still revealing themselves. The location of parcels awarded to her father by Kauikeuli at Kohala, his inclusion in a list of ali'i and konohiki of the Kaua'ula Lahaina vicinity, his appointment as konahiki for the Ahapua of Moana Nui, after the relocation of the royal seat to Hawaii, and acreage in Waikapu thread some connection to prominent families, while the swift relinquishment of most lands by the royal family and abandoned land claims awards circa 1848 speak to a fracture. The presence of Joaquin's name on a list of passport recipients for California in 1848 coincides with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the transitions of conflicting colonial governance. In 1850, Joaquin passed away of, quote, morbid cholera, end quote, living needs buawaswas katichu tichu wa amamutsun katichu tichu at Rancho Trinidad in the Pajaro Valley, and listed as a bachelor in the Mission Santa Cruz Register. Though her father left this world relatively penniless, it is told in our family that as his sole heir, Luisa came into a sum of close to $100,000 in the 1850s, with $75,000 of unpaid labor still requested from Kauikeuli, a stone house at Lahaina listed in his last will and testament. This could also be read as continued contact or relationship with her mother's family in Hawaii. Beginning around 1886, Luisa set about establishing documentation of her relationship to the land at Orofino Canyon, overlooking the San Antonio River facing north and just 2 hills facing south from the Nacimiento River. Like the now dammed flow of each, this process was often halting and diverted. Securing ownership in the era of allotment meant meetings with the San Luis Obispo County Clerk's Office, a repetitive cycle of preemption claims and other forms. Misspellings made by county clerks led to many more signed affidavits and for rough buggy rides from the rolling hills over the Cuesta Grade. Statements such as these arise again and again throughout the pages of paperwork and come to stand in for the dueling literacies that enact strength in its erasure. Quote, officiant is unable to read or write and had to have someone else write her name, end quote. The various cash sale entries throughout this region demonstrate the dedication with which Luisa worked to make payment for the wrongs that had been done to her own people on the islands and those of the coasts and hillsides of the families she came to call her relatives. Like other Native peoples, my family bent the intentions of the allotment era to respond to a disordered world, marking connection in a chain of systems meant to isolate and individuate. Her early childhood in 2 rapidly changing colonial contexts could have anchored her ideas, but she no doubt possessed the active mind and persistent knowing that has carried down our line. Like many of us, Luisa worked to repair or rewrite these histories in ways that have emanated across lifetimes, strengthening our family through intentions and marriages that are not only relational, but political. This is an inherently sovereign act, especially within the landscape of dispossession. Her navigation of the bureaucracy of the General Land Office in the 1880s as a recent widow is a testament to her strength of will, her resilience, and the long sight of her mind. Parcels were purchased for 4 of her 8 children in later years, years, but the initial stages of paperwork and cash sale entries are secured by for the parents by marriage of her son, Jose Gregorio, named Leonora and Dionisio. A seamless connection to the matrifocal is present among the first parcels purchased between 1891 and 1895, secured along two distinct waterways for her parents, for the parents of Mary, excuse me, her future daughter-in-law. Of the roughly 3,000 acres scattered throughout San Luis Obispo County, the majority of the patchwork bearing our names is sprinkled along this meandering stretch of the Nacimiento River. Since bisected by the Nacimiento Dam, some of these places rest underwater, while others are prevented from visit by the borders of Camp Roberts or private housing developments, seized through eminent domain. These false divides continue to iterate from the first moments of contact on varied and various coasts. Understanding the power of paper and settler cosmologies, she used their tools to articulate our design, weaving consistent connection in the dotted patterns of parcels that echo the intermittent use of color in coiled baskets or a string of shells. These paths reflect responsibilities, often carried within families that changed form in the era of allotment, enclosure, and labor, paid marginally to cultivate an increasingly wealthless world. We worked the ranches that stole our villages out from under us, claiming eminent domain or abandonment, absent humanity or extinction. Restrained through linguistic as well as physical, spatial, and economic means, we continue to assert sí mismo, which as a living intention and action is always growing and changing. So sí mismo is a term that can be translated as companion or friend, but when you break that word down, it's literally like the intention to accompany someone. So I use that term when I can to kind of speak more explicitly to our understandings of relationships. Kinship is often a stand-in that can be used in like intertribal contexts, but yeah, sí mismo is a term that I feel articulates that more beautifully in our language. Long before such inequities, our movement followed and follows many patterns. Tilhini becomes San Luis Obispo, Sithala becomes Cayucas, Sithacawayu reimagined as Cambria, following paths of seeds and sweat into soil and colored kerchiefs. Old Creek, which follows the northern parts of Santa Rita Road, named after a ranch that employed our relatives, is halted before its outflow to the sea to provide water for a seaside town, a college, and a prison, mirroring the enclosure and incarceration that made possible its making. What they did to the land, they did to each of us in turn. The purchases of each parcel made by Luisa coinciding with the marriage of her youngest son, Jose Gregorio, and Mary, the middle daughter of Leonora and Dionisio. Their union would eventually result in 10 children, many of whom married into other prominent indigenous families throughout the Central Coast and valleys. The fact that each of the parents' parcels are in disparate parts of the county not only recognizes the current moment of their partnership through cultural understanding, which situates marriage as a choice to live together, consensually dissolved through change of residence or simple relational shift, but also echoes the scope of relationships throughout our homelands and beyond. Without our stories, documentation, whether from a land office, mission record, or anthropological perspective, has little meaning. Our stories represent complex and expansive possibilities because we are speaking from a defined place, even when the language is changing. Our places, occupied by absence, are brimming at the edges of the mythologies of the settled, are living in the forever of a dream that made this world and the next, and the next, and the next. Needs Butiana Nilhisa Shumokini, a seamless, unending whole. So again, as I mentioned, that was just an excerpt of the chapter that's going to be included, but that anthology, Allotment Stories, will be released by University of Minnesota Press in February of 2022. So that excerpt is from a chapter that I've been kind of crafting over the last couple of years. I've had to volley it back and forth from editors. It's been really wonderful to have some like long breaks from looking at that text and then get insight from other people. But one of the other things I wanted to kind of respond to in this, the kind of framework for this conversation was really looking at, you know, the importance of that introspection that was made possible throughout the pandemic, and maybe the necessity of it, but that it was also really juxtaposed against a great deal of traveling that I was allowed to do over the last, like the prior few years. So I was actually in Aotearoa and Matapauri for my friend Ahila Palapa and her wife Ella Grace's wedding. And I think I got back to California on like February 28th or something close to then. So I had gone to Sydney, Australia just before that, to Eora Nation Homelands for an exhibition that my friend Leolie, who's in the like center photo with 3 people, they're on the left-hand side. They had curated me into an exhibition at the Gallery of New South Wales and, Gallery of University of New South Wales. And I had been to Australia maybe once or twice before because Leolie and I collaborated with 3 other Indigenous curators from other sides of the Pacific on a series of exhibitions. The first was installed at the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane. It was called The Commute, followed by Layover, which was hosted at Art Space in Tamaki Makaurau, also known as Auckland, New Zealand. And then it culminated at the Vancouver Art Gallery in Vancouver, BC. And each iteration of the show was grounded in kind of commissioning new works from Indigenous artists. So basically from 2017, which was the first time that I had the opportunity to go to Aotearoa or to New Zealand with a group of students from UC Davis to attend an Indigenous knowledge conference, He Manawa Whenua. Basically from that first trip, I just kept building relationships with people and kept having the opportunity to be invited back. And was able to have this work supported by collaborating with one another. So we were writing lots of grants to get funding from various governments. I mean, for the exhibition that we co-curated, the United States, I think, was the only occupying government that didn't provide any funding for any of the exhibitions. So we were reliant on a lot of private grants, and it was something that made me really appreciate the work that curators do. This was my first kind of round curating a project of this volume, and it really made me look at the ways that I had been really terrible at responding to curators' emails or getting back to people many weeks late. So I really I got my comeuppance with this project. But in the ways that being sheltered in place had provided these opportunities for really intent introspection, and also the opportunity to kind of synthesize some of the things that I had learned from visiting with other Indigenous peoples in different parts of the world. And it also provided the space for introspection traveling in that way. I think the thing that never ceased to amaze me is that, how many overlapping protocols we have, right? How much diplomacy that we engage in as Native peoples every day, right? When you're not living in your own homelands, when you are visiting someone else's community, when you've been invited to someone else's table, right? It's something that we navigate all the time. So I'm really grateful for the movement that was possible in the years before the pandemic, and this time has made it so that I have to be very intentional about the ways that I'm maintaining those relationships, and maintaining all my relationships, like even close distances, right? There's sometimes like months of planning that went into seeing one another, um, when we were observing like safety protocols and things like that. But the last selection that I wanted to share with you and the video work that accompanies it, which the piece was first published in ArtLeak, in an edition called Kinship Constellations that was guest edited by Leili Ashragi and Kimberly Moulton. So Leili Ashragi is from Samoa and is also Persian. And Kimberly Moulton is a Yorta Yorta curator based in Melbourne, Australia. Their editing this project was done with the intention to bring in voices from all over to kind of look at the ways that Indigenous peoples are constantly building expansive relationships and worlds. So we see this within California context and we see it well beyond it. The video piece was featured in, wait, where are my notes? I want to get the title of this exhibition wrong, was installed at the Crocker Art Museum, but also lived as a digital exhibition for the Multiple Horizons Tribal Perspectives at the Confluence group exhibit, which I was very happy to be invited to be a part of. The Crocker Art Museum is probably the first art museum I ever went to. I grew up in Nisenana Miwok homelands in Treaty J country in Sacramento. So it was really lovely to see this work in conversation with artists from the area. So yeah, so I'll share this final piece and hopefully kind of close it out with some discussion, or if there are any questions. I know this is like a very small group of people today, so hopefully we can just chat a little. Sisimu, many stars, many alabella. Meet you. You're far away. The tides are low. Kisimu, like many words in Tanasmu Tulhinkatichu, explains a story rather than a fixed or singular vocabulary. Olivella biplicata has a gorgeous shell with colors that smoothly transition from stark white to milky lavender to rich honey golds in combination or alone along a softly curving spire. A being reflecting spiritual wealth and a symbol of exchange from our homeland, spanning mountain ranges east to Nitzpu Nakota to Katichu, south well beyond recently imagined lines of occupying nations, and along margins of the sea north to Nitzpu Unaga and Katichu. Kasimu grounds Yaktichu Tichu Yaktilhini in a vast network of relation. Yakitanasmu wa Yakitomo Tomo, which echo the cadence and vocabulary and stone planks of many other nations, extends these connections well across Huapasini, the one ocean. Imagining distance and constellations. Most of my family is living in diaspora from our homelands due to dispossession. Matriarchal lands now submerged by dammed rivers, once glistening with rainbow trout, enclosed with barbed wire to herd the cattle that replaced us, or mediated entirely by military bases and removal to private collections. Though privileged to be a visitor at Huichin meets Butichu Saitana Chocheño, within the range of extended neighbors, cousins, and kin, I make the 4-hour drive regularly to watch freshwater bloom and saltwater tides and gather along beaches our family has known since time immemorial. We have always been well-traveled people. Imagining distance and constellations that tether us to the spring of who we are. Kisimu also situates us within the mirror of the sky, The word is also used to describe stars, each relation an anchor in constellations of movement, navigation, shifting tides, and shared ceremony. Indeed, it is this movement that iterates across waters and continents that brings me to this place again and again. Ipili Ha'olfa explained in Our Sea of Islands that the, quote, once boundless world, end quote, was transformed into a mythology of confinement. This extends to the edges of what is designated as, quote, Pacific or, quote, Atlantic, quote, Caribbean, quote, Arctic, or otherwise. In Yakitanasmu, as in many of our language, we know it as one connected being. In all our rupture and resilience, some have forgotten about the full expanse of relatives on other shores. But like the tides that call multitudes of stars to the softly churning surf at Sithala or Cayucas, Yakispuslahisha, our world is in continuous motion, wa yatsna kinosmu sa isakwa yaki kanityani nispuspu. And this knowing makes our worlds whole. We are returning. Sa islahini, the tides of full and high. Thank you. So that was what I had prepared to share today, just some readings. Yeah, are there any questions or reflections?
Can you talk a little bit about your language learning journey?
So it started out as a very solitary process, and was also very supported by people in my life. So I'm going to go ahead and put Sabine on blast here. Sabine actually gifted me a dictionary from her community. So kind of cousin language, related language, that really allowed me to kind of lean into looking at the kind of building blocks of language. So there had been a lot of work done in her community, and just being able to have like a kind of document to look at, even though our language is different, that there are still some pieces that we like, even in our language team now, like we turn to our neighboring languages to kind of get insight on like what building blocks for for the language that we want to continue to build, where it can come from. So it really was supported through those kinds of relationships. And then when I started to reconnect with family, I was very well situated to be supported in that work. One of my cousins works very closely with ICLES, Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, and was also in one of the reasons why I applied to the Native Studies department at UC Davis was that there is a language requirement for the PhD program. So I was like, okay, this is going to put a fire under me to like really do some close language study and to take advantage of the resources that I maybe have access to in an institution that I didn't have otherwise. And it just really took off from there. I feel really privileged to have like a knack for pattern recognition, which I think really helps like the ways that I learn language. I attribute that to like my work as a visual artist in a lot of ways. But it just became so critical to both my scholarly practice and my visual practice, because there are things that we can say in language that we can't say in English, or it takes like 6 or 7 sentences to explain something that like is just so such an effortless explanation of like a very full concept that speaks to our worldview, right? You can't disentangle worldview from language in a lot of ways, or that's been my experience. But yeah, things were kind of picking up in that more internal practice. And then I attended Breath of Life in 2018. And then it was just over for me. Then I was just in deep. And now it's something that I do, a little bit every day. I've spend a lot of time with the notes from our from our community. just transcribing things, highlighting things in PDFs, and with like thousands of post-it notes everywhere. But you know, as I'm kind of leaning into my final year of like dissertation writing, this language work is like so essential for me to feel like the work that I'm doing is like rooted. I don't want to write in a way that feels like if my like 19-year-old cousins can't read my dissertation and get something out of it, I don't think that I'm doing it the right way, right? I want to make sure that we're centering our languages and our knowledge systems, and language is a really beautiful way to do that. I think this is true for many of this kind of critical mass of California Native students coming up right now. For a lot of us, like people haven't written, like the only people who've written about our community are people from outside of it. And so there is like a heavy amount of responsibility and like how we're representing our communities. We have an opportunity to write a story that is fuller, or maybe speaks more accurately to the things that our community has lived through, while also speaking about our possibilities into the future. And yeah, I think about that a lot. Like what has been written about our community, a lot of what has been written about us was written by people who like directly benefited from us no longer being here. So how do we use our language? How do we use our visual practices? How do we use our material culture to tell a fuller story, to tell a story that actually speaks to our possibility in the future? Yeah. Are there any other language nerds in the room?
Any other questions? If you're too shy to speak, that's okay. There's the chat that you can use as well. Okay. All right. If that is all we have, we might be able to wrap up a little early. If I think, oh, Julie just put one of our books in the chat for language learning, how to, oh, here we do have something. Tell us the exciting upcoming projects you have. That's a good one.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest exciting upcoming project is going to be finishing my dissertation. I've spent the last couple of months saying no to a lot of things that have come up because I need to finish this. And I know that I just have to like roll my sleeves up and really focus on this. Yeah, so I think that some of the most exciting things that I have the opportunity to do right now is really like delve into all of the research that I've been collecting for a long time, and that I've also that has also been given to me by other people in my family who had been doing this work for 20-30 years, who like as soon as they found out that this is what I was writing my dissertation about, that I was writing about like the land that we had and how it was stolen within 20 years and the different industries that are implicated in that. I just got handed like massive amounts of documents from people who had been doing this when you still had to, send requests to the National Archives in DC and get like hard copy printouts of everything. Whereas like now those things are digitized, and I get to kind of build from the research and the work that was already done in my family and kind of put it together in a way that hopefully will be dynamic. So the dissertation that I'm writing is not just kind of straightforward history. You kind of got a sense of that in how I write. I include like a lot of poetry. There's visual work that's incorporated into it. One of the things that I've been playing with is like making interactive maps where some of the video work, like what you've seen, where I'm documenting very specific places and looking at specific villages that were impacted by For example, like the Hearst family taking the land at Tisimasu or San Simeon. That is a village that my family is from. And that is a place that my family worked even after it was privatized, and kind of doing this visual work of telling our stories of those places as well, like making visible the knowledges that lived there and that live there in a way that is yeah, allows the reader to experience the dissertation in a different way. I find that when I am reading or encountering someone's work and there's like a creative element of it, it accesses a different part of my brain, like that information settles in a different way. So I'm really excited to yeah, make some more video work and to incorporate some of the collage work that I've done. I think some of what you can see in the back and what's been highlighted in other issues of Eastern Native California is like a lot of two-dimensional or like kind of collage on canvas works. So one of the things that I've been playing with throughout the shelter in place when I've had lots of time inside my house is like making animations from some of those collage elements. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we have time for another question if there are any others.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
Sorry, I chimed in late. But the other Zoom I was on, I didn't expect it to go that long.
Oh, it's all good. I'm happy to see you.
So I saw that you were recently confirmed as an appointee to the statewide UC NAGPRA committee. Have you spoken about that at all yet today? And I was just wondering what your thoughts or hopes are.
No.
Sorry, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
You are, but I'm glad you are.
I was just so excited to see that. And, you know, I kind of Googled everybody and I figured out that most of the committees now are really a majority Native.
I know.
The UC reps are Native, then half the committees are actually appointed or recommended by tribes. So
yes,
it just feels like the tide's turning. You know, it was an emotional moment for me. So I was wondering if you had anything to say about it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that reflection too, because I also like went in, because I don't know, I mean, I was thinking about this in the context of like how many California Native students are in the UC system right now. And that there's this real, moment where there are lots of us who are not only like building relationships with one another in these academic spaces, but also through community. And like, I don't know if this was like a concerted strategy, but it was definitely the reason why I wanted to apply as a UC representative, is like, we need as many Native people on these committees as possible, because we've seen what happens when, you know, places like UC Berkeley not having a Native person on their committee until 2018, right? It's like, we've seen what the UC has done to kind of maintain the status quo. And so I did attend the NAHC webinar where like the nominations were confirmed, and kind of got a sense of the tensions that exist there, right? Like some people who are maybe supposed to be supporting them are not actually providing the insight that is needed. And it is a lot easier to kind of work towards something that could possibly enact change when there are like more of us collaborating with one another, and there are more of us who have the same intention in mind. I think from that meeting, I feel very aware of the fact that like these systems are going to do everything in their power to maintain the power that they hold, right? What I also saw in that meeting, and what I think about moving forward, is that this is an opportunity for us to put our words and our perspectives like in the public record. Like this is not just for, you know, and I feel like the campus committees are doing much more direct work, right? Like I applied to the system-wide one because I also, I want to speak about like the policy more broadly. I want to advocate and bring the concerns of like people that I know who do this work more intimately to the table. But, you know, I don't have any rose-colored glasses around like how this is going to necessarily move forward. But I think we have a really important responsibility for like, you know, the people who are 20 years from now, they're going to be able to look at these documents and see that there have been people advocating for this for decades, just in the same way that we're able to do this now. And like, hopefully there will be some real changes in how this policy is like actually implemented, instead of it being like stalled out for 30 years like it has been. I also just want to recognize the work of like people like you, Anthony, who have been doing this work in your community, and that you're like stepping into this responsibility, not only as somebody who is a PhD candidate, right, who is going to have that PhD, and you know you're going to be doing this work. Just that like these collaborations and these connections are really important, and I hope that I look forward to being in collaboration with one another throughout this process, and really like just having each other's backs and building the connections with some of the other people on the committees. Like, I was really excited to see some of the people on the committee, and to see them speaking up even in that NAHC meeting, where I'm like, oh, I'm in good company. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I like definitely like cried.
I did too.
Because the fact of the matter is that this shouldn't even have to happen. Like, this shouldn't exist. And I know like right before this call started, there was some recognition of some of the like the children that have been found in these different residential schools, and talking about how broad that scope is going to have to be when you're actually looking at the places that have and continue to impact Native youth throughout the state, right? It's not just residential schools. We're going to have to be looking at museum collections. We're going to have to be looking at the missions. We're going to have to be looking at like juvenile correctional centers that are still functioning. Like, this is still happening. And like, it's my belief that until these things get like fixed, like it's going to keep happening. And that's like when I say fixed, I mean that in like an old school way, right? Like, but I feel like there is, I mentioned this before the call, but I'm like, this is coming up right now to receive some healing and to receive some intention. But it's also gonna like, we're also gonna have to make sure we have really strong networks of support, because this is also gonna bring up a lot, you know? And I know that's true even with working on these committees, right? Like, it's not abstract to us, right? Like, you have a very intimate connection to like the work that you're going to be doing there. And like, yeah, I look forward to kind of nurturing those like networks of support and staying in touch around that. Like, hit me up whenever. I'm here. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for busting me out.
Thank you. I don't know what the tone of this was before I came in. Sorry if I
it's important.
get in a different direction.
It's important.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your beautiful presentation and sharing so much of your history, your personal history, and your beautiful work. I really, really appreciated all of it. And I know everybody else here did as well. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. Gosh, I know these Zoom things can be a lot, and especially now when things are open back up and there's in-person events happening. I thank you all for your commitment to supporting the program today. Everybody, take good care of yourselves, and we appreciate you all, and we look forward to connecting again. Thank you.
Thank you.